Picture this. You're walking through the bustling agora of ancient Athens, the Mediterranean sun beating down on marble columns and dusty streets. Street vendors call out their wares, coins clink in leather pouches, and the air is thick with the aroma of something deliciously indulgent. You follow your nose and discover a small stall where a weathered merchant is ladling golden honey over what looks like twisted dough, while another vendor nearby is frying small cakes in olive oil until they're perfectly crispy. These aren't the vegetables and grains that historians usually talk about when discussing ancient Greek diets. These are the ancient world's version of junk food, and they were just as irresistible to the Greeks as potato chips and candy bars are to us today. If you're enjoying this journey into the delicious secrets of ancient history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating glimpses into how our ancestors really lived. We're always digging up the tastiest historical tidbits that textbooks never tell you about. But before we dive deeper into this sugary, oily world of ancient indulgence, I want to hear from you. What modern junk food do you think would have been the biggest hit in ancient Greece? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because some of your guesses might surprise you by how close they are to what Greeks actually craved. The story of junk food in ancient Greece begins with a fundamental misunderstanding that many people have about the ancient world. We often imagine our ancestors as paragons of healthy eating, subsisting on simple grains, fresh vegetables, and the occasional piece of fish or meat. While it's true that the Mediterranean diet has its roots in ancient Greek eating habits, the reality is far more complex and, frankly, far more human than we typically acknowledge. The ancient Greeks, just like us, had their weaknesses when it came to food. They craved sweet, salty, and rich flavors. They indulged in treats that were bad for them. They had street food, comfort food, and yes, even what we might recognize today as junk food. The concept of junk food, of course, didn't exist in ancient Greece the way we understand it today. There were no massive industrial food processing plants churning out artificially flavored snacks loaded with preservatives and chemicals. But there were absolutely foods that served the same psychological and social functions as modern junk food. These were foods that were calorie-dense, often sweet or savory in intense ways, frequently fried or honey-sweetened, and consumed more for pleasure than for nutrition. They were the foods people reached for when they wanted comfort, celebration, or just a momentary escape from the everyday. To understand Greek junk food, we need to first understand the broader context of eating in ancient Greece. The typical Greek diet was built around what historians call the Mediterranean triad: wheat, olives, and grapes. These provided bread, olive oil, and wine, respectively, and formed the foundation of most meals. Beyond this, Greeks ate legumes like lentils and chickpeas, vegetables when they could get them, fish if they lived near the coast, and meat primarily during religious festivals and special occasions. It was, by and large, a healthy diet by modern standards, rich in fiber, healthy fats, and complex carbohydrates. But humans are not machines, and the Greeks were no exception. They craved variety, excitement, and indulgence just as much as we do. This is where the ancient equivalent of junk food comes into play. These were the foods that broke the monotony of daily eating, the special treats that made ordinary days feel festive, and the indulgences that brought people together in shared pleasure. One of the most important categories of ancient Greek junk food was honey-sweetened treats. Honey was the primary sweetener available to the Greeks, as sugar wouldn't arrive in the Mediterranean until much later. But calling it simply a sweetener doesn't do justice to how precious and magical honey seemed to ancient peoples. They associated it with the gods, with immortality, and with pure pleasure. Honey was expensive enough that using it liberally was a sign of indulgence, making honey-based treats the ancient equivalent of premium desserts. The Greeks created numerous honey-sweetened confections that would be immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with modern Middle Eastern or Mediterranean sweets. There were melomacaron, which were essentially honey cakes, often flavored with wine and olive oil, then soaked in honey syrup until they were almost dripping with sweetness. These cakes were dense, rich, and intensely sweet, exactly the kind of calorie-dense indulgence that characterizes junk food. They were often made for special occasions, but like modern junk food, they had a way of appearing at ordinary times when people wanted to treat themselves. Another popular honey-based treat was what the Greeks called plakos, which were flat cakes that could be either sweet or savory, but were most beloved in their sweet form. The sweet versions were made with cheese, honey, and sometimes nuts, creating a dessert that was rich in both calories and satisfaction. These cakes were often sold by street vendors, making them accessible to ordinary people who wanted a quick indulgence. The combination of cheese and honey created an intensely satisfying flavor profile that hit multiple pleasure points simultaneously, much like how modern junk foods are engineered to trigger our cravings for fat, salt, and sugar. But perhaps the most interesting honey-based treat, from the perspective of understanding ancient junk food, was something called gastris. This was essentially honeyed cheese, but the preparation method made it something special. Fresh cheese would be mixed with honey and sometimes wine, then shaped and often garnished with nuts or dried fruits. The result was something that was part dessert, part snack, and entirely indulgent. Gastris was popular at symposiums, the famous Greek drinking parties, where it served as both a sweet counterpoint to wine and a rich, satisfying snack that could help absorb alcohol. In this context, it functioned much like modern bar snacks or party foods, designed to enhance social experiences while providing intense flavors and satisfaction. Nuts played a crucial role in ancient Greek junk food culture as well. While nuts are generally considered healthy today, the way the Greeks prepared and consumed them often pushed them into junk food territory. They would roast nuts in oil or honey, creating intensely flavored, calorie-dense snacks that were easy to overconsume. Almonds, walnuts, and pistachios were all popular, but the Greeks had a particular fondness for roasted chickpeas, which they would season with salt and sometimes honey, creating a snack that was simultaneously crunchy, salty, and sweet. The preparation of nuts as snacks reveals something important about the psychology of ancient Greek junk food. These weren't just foods, they were social lubricants. Nuts were commonly served at symposiums and other social gatherings, where they encouraged conversation and provided something to do with one's hands while drinking and talking. This social function is remarkably similar to how we use snack foods today, at parties, movie theaters, and social gatherings. The nuts were designed to be eaten absent-mindedly, in handfuls, while attention was focused elsewhere. This mindless consumption pattern is one of the hallmarks of junk food behavior, and it existed in ancient Greece just as clearly as it does today. The Greeks also had their version of fried foods, another cornerstone of junk food culture. Olive oil was abundant in Greece, and frying was a popular cooking method that created foods with intense flavors and satisfying textures. One of the most popular fried treats was something called tiganita, which were essentially fritters or donuts. These were made from a simple batter of flour, water, or milk, and sometimes eggs, then fried in olive oil until golden and crispy. They were often served with honey drizzled on top, creating a combination of textures and flavors that was irresistibly indulgent. Tiganita reveals another important aspect of ancient Greek junk food: its accessibility. Unlike elaborate dishes that required expensive ingredients or complex preparation, tiganita could be made with basic ingredients that were available to most people. This democratization of indulgence is a key characteristic of junk food throughout history. While the wealthy might have had access to more exotic treats, even ordinary people could occasionally afford the simple pleasure of fried dough and honey. The Greeks also enjoyed various forms of what we might call ancient candy. They would preserve fruits in honey, creating intensely sweet confections that could be stored and enjoyed over time. Figs, dates, and grapes were commonly preserved this way, resulting in treats that were far sweeter and more calorie-dense than the fresh fruits. These preserved fruits were often combined with nuts and spices to create complex flavor profiles that were both exotic and satisfying. One particularly interesting ancient Greek candy was made from grape juice that was boiled down until it became thick and syrup-like, then formed into shapes and allowed to harden. This created a chewy, intensely sweet candy that was remarkably similar to modern fruit leather or gummy candies. The concentration of natural sugars made these treats incredibly energy-dense, and their portability made them popular with travelers and soldiers who needed quick energy boosts. Street food culture was vibrant in ancient Greek cities, particularly in Athens, and much of what was sold on the streets would qualify as junk food by any reasonable definition. Vendors would set up stalls in the agora and other public spaces, offering quick, tasty, and often indulgent foods to busy city dwellers. These weren't the carefully balanced meals that families might prepare at home, but rather foods designed to satisfy immediate cravings and provide quick energy. One popular street food was sausages, which were made from various meats and seasoned heavily with spices and herbs. These sausages were often quite fatty and salty, designed more for flavor impact than nutritional balance. They were cooked over open fires, creating enticing aromas that would draw customers from across the marketplace. The high fat and salt content made them intensely satisfying, but also quite unhealthy when consumed regularly, much like modern processed meats. Another common street food was various forms of flatbread topped with cheese, herbs, or other savory ingredients. These were the ancient ancestors of pizza, and like their modern descendants, they were designed to be eaten quickly, by hand while standing or walking. The combination of bread, oil, and toppings created foods that were calorie-dense and satisfying, but not particularly nutritious. They were comfort foods designed to fill people up quickly and cheaply while providing maximum flavor satisfaction. The Greeks also had a thriving culture around what we might call ancient fast food. Thermopolia, which were essentially ancient restaurants or taverns, served quick meals to people who were traveling, or who didn't have time to prepare food at home. Many of the foods served at these establishments were high in fat, salt, or sugar, designed to be satisfying and memorable rather than healthful. Stews heavy with oil, meat dishes rich in fat, and various fried foods were common offerings. These establishments served a crucial social function that's remarkably similar to modern fast food restaurants. They provided convenient, affordable indulgence for people living busy urban lives. Workers who spent long days in the agora could grab a quick, satisfying meal without having to go home to cook. Travelers could find familiar, comforting foods that would give them energy for their journeys. In many ways, these ancient fast food establishments served the same role that McDonald's or KFC serve today, providing quick, consistent, and indulgent food experiences. The role of alcohol in ancient Greek junk food culture cannot be overlooked. Wine was consumed regularly and was often quite sweet, providing both alcohol and sugar in quantities that would be considered excessive by modern health standards. But beyond wine, the Greeks also enjoyed various fermented beverages that were sweetened with honey or fruit, creating drinks that were essentially alcoholic desserts. These sweet alcoholic beverages were often consumed alongside rich fatty foods at social gatherings, creating eating and drinking experiences that were intensely indulgent. The combination of alcohol, sugar, and fat created powerful pleasure responses that encouraged overconsumption, much like modern combinations of alcohol and junk food. The symposium culture, where wealthy Greeks would gather to drink, eat, and socialize, was built around this kind of indulgent consumption. Symposiums themselves were fascinating examples of ancient junk food culture. These weren't just drinking parties, they were elaborate social events where the food and drink were designed specifically for indulgence rather than nutrition. The typical symposium spread included various rich cheeses, honey-sweetened cakes, nuts roasted in oil, preserved fruits, and other calorie-dense treats. The goal was pleasure, not health, and the foods reflected that priority. The social aspect of symposiums reveals another important dimension of ancient Greek junk food culture. These indulgent foods weren't just about individual pleasure, they were about community bonding and social signaling. Serving elaborate, rich foods demonstrated wealth and hospitality. Sharing these indulgent treats created bonds between participants and marked special occasions as different from everyday life. This social function of junk food is something we still see today in how we use food to celebrate, comfort, and connect with others. Seasonal festivals in ancient Greece also played a crucial role in junk food culture. Religious festivals often featured elaborate feasts where normal dietary restrictions were relaxed and indulgent foods were not just permitted but expected. These festivals served as pressure release valves for a society that normally emphasized moderation and self-control. During festivals, people could indulge in rich meats, elaborate desserts, and excessive drinking without social judgment. The Dionysiac festivals, dedicated to the god of wine, were particularly notorious for their food excesses. These celebrations featured not just abundant wine, but also rich foods designed to complement and absorb the alcohol. Elaborate meat dishes, sweet honey cakes, and various fried treats were common features of these festivals. The temporary nature of these indulgences made them even more precious and eagerly anticipated, much like how modern holidays create opportunities for guilt-free junk food consumption. Athletic competitions also featured their own food culture that included many indulgent options. The Olympic Games and other athletic festivals weren't just sporting events. They were major social gatherings that attracted people from across the Greek world. Food vendors would set up elaborate operations to feed the crowds, offering everything from simple roasted nuts to elaborate honey cakes. The competitive atmosphere and celebratory mood encouraged indulgent eating, and many of the foods sold were designed more for pleasure and energy than for balanced nutrition. The influence of trade on ancient Greek junk food culture was profound. As Greek cities became more prosperous and connected to broader Mediterranean trade networks, exotic ingredients became available that allowed for more elaborate and indulgent food preparations. Spices, dried fruits, and other luxury ingredients could be imported and used to create treats that were both exotic and intensely flavorful. These imported ingredients often ended up in what were essentially ancient luxury junk foods. Expensive spices might be used to flavor honey cakes, creating treats that were both indulgent and exclusive. Dried fruits from distant lands could be combined with local nuts and honey to create complex, calorie-dense confections that served as both treats and status symbols. The combination of luxury and indulgence created foods that served multiple psychological functions, much like how expensive modern junk foods can make consumers feel both indulged and sophisticated. The medical writings of ancient Greek physicians provide fascinating insights into contemporary attitudes toward indulgent eating. Hippocrates and other medical writers were well aware that certain foods, while pleasurable, were not conducive to health when consumed in excess. They wrote extensively about the dangers of overindulging in rich, sweet, or fatty foods, demonstrating that the ancient Greeks understood the concept of junk food, even if they didn't use that term. These medical writings reveal that many ancient Greeks struggled with the same tensions around food that we face today. They knew that certain foods were bad for them, but found them difficult to resist. Physicians would prescribe moderation and warn against the health consequences of excessive indulgence, but people continued to seek out and enjoy these foods anyway. This tension between knowledge and behavior is remarkably modern and shows that the psychology of junk food consumption is deeply rooted in human nature. The economic aspects of ancient Greek junk food culture also deserve attention. Many of the most indulgent foods were relatively expensive, making them occasional treats rather than daily staples for most people. Honey, imported spices, and elaborate preparations required resources that ordinary families had to budget for carefully. This scarcity made these treats even more precious and desirable, creating psychological associations between indulgent foods and special occasions or personal success. However, there were also cheaper versions of many indulgent foods that made them accessible to broader segments of society. Street vendors would offer simplified versions of elaborate desserts, using fewer expensive ingredients but still creating satisfying treats. This democratization of indulgence meant that even people of modest means could occasionally enjoy foods that were designed primarily for pleasure rather than nutrition. The preparation methods used for ancient Greek junk foods reveal sophisticated understanding of flavor enhancement and food chemistry, even if the Greeks didn't understand the science behind their techniques. Frying foods in oil created textures and flavors that were intensely satisfying. Combining honey with various ingredients created complex sweetness profiles that triggered strong pleasure responses. Roasting nuts and grains enhanced their natural flavors and created addictive crunching textures. These preparation methods were often labor-intensive, which added to both the cost and the specialness of the resulting foods. Making elaborate honey cakes or properly roasted nut mixtures required skill, time, and attention. This investment of effort made the foods more valuable psychologically, but it also meant that they were typically prepared for special occasions rather than daily consumption. The preservation techniques used for ancient Greek treats also influenced their junk food characteristics. Preserving fruits in honey created intensely sweet confections that were far more calorie-dense than fresh fruits. Drying and salting various foods concentrated their flavors and made them more shelf-stable, but also made them easier to overconsume. These preservation techniques, while practical, often pushed foods into junk food territory by concentrating sugars, salts, and fats. Gender played an interesting role in ancient Greek junk food culture. Many of the most elaborate sweet treats were associated with women's cooking and women's social gatherings. Women were often responsible for preparing honey cakes and other desserts for family celebrations and religious festivals. This association gave certain types of junk food a feminine character that influenced how they were perceived and consumed. At the same time, other forms of indulgent eating were distinctly masculine. The symposium culture was primarily male-dominated, and the foods served at these gatherings reflected masculine preferences for rich, savory foods that complemented heavy drinking. Roasted meats, salty nuts, and savory cheeses were more common at male social gatherings, while sweet treats were more associated with mixed-gender or female-dominated events. Children in ancient Greece had their own relationship with junk food that was remarkably similar to modern patterns. Parents would use sweet treats as rewards for good behavior or as special treats on holidays and festivals. Honey cakes, preserved fruits, and nuts were commonly given to children as treats, creating positive associations between indulgent foods and love, celebration, and reward. These childhood experiences with junk food created lasting psychological associations that influenced adult eating behaviors. Adults who had grown up receiving honey cakes as special treats would continue to associate these foods with comfort, celebration, and emotional satisfaction throughout their lives. This psychological programming is remarkably similar to how modern junk food marketing targets children to create lifelong brand loyalty and emotional connections to specific foods. The religious dimensions of ancient Greek junk food culture add another layer of complexity to the story. Many indulgent foods were associated with specific gods or religious festivals, giving them sacred as well as pleasurable characteristics. Honey was associated with various deities and was often used in religious offerings. Wine was sacred to Dionysus, and elaborate feasts were integral parts of many religious celebrations. This religious sanctification of indulgent eating created cultural permission for behaviors that might otherwise be seen as excessive or immoral. During religious festivals, normal rules about moderation could be suspended in service of honoring the gods. This created structured opportunities for junk food consumption that were both socially acceptable and spiritually meaningful. The literary evidence for ancient Greek junk food culture is extensive and revealing. Comic playwrights like Aristophanes frequently referenced food obsessions and culinary indulgences in their works, suggesting that excessive eating was common enough to be a source of humor and social commentary. These literary references provide evidence that the Greeks were well aware of their own tendencies toward food indulgence and were capable of laughing at themselves for these very human weaknesses. Epic poems and other serious literature also contain numerous references to elaborate feasts and indulgent eating, often in contexts that suggest both admiration and moral ambivalence about such excess. These literary depictions help us understand how the Greeks thought about the tension between pleasure and virtue when it came to food, and they reveal that this tension was a significant part of their cultural consciousness. Archaeological evidence for ancient Greek junk food culture comes from various sources, including cooking implements, food storage containers, and artistic depictions of eating scenes. Archaeologists have found specialized equipment for making honey cakes, nut roasting apparatus, and elaborate serving dishes designed for presenting rich foods. These material remains provide concrete evidence for the kinds of indulgent eating that literary sources describe. Artistic depictions of banquets and food preparation also provide valuable insights into ancient Greek junk food culture. Pottery paintings and sculptures often show people enjoying elaborate meals with obvious pleasure, sometimes to the point of apparent excess. These artistic representations help us understand not just what people ate, but how they felt about their eating and how they wanted to be remembered in connection with food. The regional variations in ancient Greek junk food culture reflect the diversity of the Greek world and the influence of local ingredients and traditions. Islands with abundant fishing might have developed different types of indulgent foods than mountainous regions with different agricultural products. Cities with extensive trade connections could access ingredients that rural areas couldn't afford, leading to different types of luxury foods and indulgent preparations. These regional differences also reflect varying cultural attitudes toward indulgence and pleasure. Some Greek cities were known for their luxurious lifestyles and elaborate cuisine, while others prided themselves on simplicity and moderation. These cultural differences influenced both the types of junk foods that were popular and the social attitudes toward consuming them. The influence of ancient Greek junk food culture on later culinary traditions is significant and often underappreciated. Many of the honey-based sweets that were popular in ancient Greece evolved into the baklava, loukoumades, and other desserts that are still popular in Greece and throughout the Mediterranean today. The basic techniques and flavor combinations developed by ancient Greek cooks continue to influence Mediterranean cuisine. Similarly, the street food culture that flourished in ancient Greek cities provided a model for urban food distribution that influenced later cultures throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. The idea of specialized food vendors selling quick, indulgent foods to busy urban dwellers spread throughout the ancient world and remains a fundamental part of city life today. The philosophical implications of ancient Greek junk food culture were significant and influenced broader Greek thinking about pleasure, virtue, and the good life. Philosophers like Epicurus, who emphasized pleasure as the highest good, had to grapple with questions about what kinds of pleasures were worthwhile and what kinds led to suffering. Food pleasure was a central part of these philosophical discussions. Other philosophers, particularly the Stoics, viewed excessive food indulgence as a form of weakness that prevented people from achieving true happiness and virtue. These philosophical debates about food and pleasure influenced Greek culture broadly and created intellectual frameworks for thinking about indulgent eating that continue to influence Western thought today. The health consequences of ancient Greek junk food consumption were real and observable, even if the Greeks didn't understand the medical mechanisms involved. Wealthy Greeks who could afford to indulge regularly in rich foods often suffered from what we would now recognize as diet-related health problems. Ancient medical writers documented various ailments that they associated with excessive consumption of sweet, fatty, or rich foods. These health observations led to the development of dietary recommendations that emphasized moderation and balance, principles that became fundamental to Greek medical thinking and influenced later medical traditions. The Greeks developed sophisticated understanding of how different foods affected the body, even without modern scientific knowledge about nutrition and metabolism. The psychological functions of ancient Greek junk food were sophisticated and multi-layered. These foods served as comfort during difficult times, celebration during happy occasions, and social bonding tools during gatherings. They provided sensory pleasure that could temporarily distract from life's hardships and create positive emotional states that enhanced social relationships. The Greeks understood intuitively that food could be medicine for the soul as well as fuel for the body. They used indulgent foods strategically to manage emotions, mark important occasions, and create shared experiences that strengthened community bonds. This psychological sophistication around food use demonstrates that ancient peoples were just as complex in their relationships with eating as modern people are. The economic impact of junk food culture in ancient Greece was substantial. The demand for honey, exotic spices, and other luxury food ingredients drove trade relationships and influenced agricultural practices. Regions that could produce high-quality honey or nuts found ready markets for their products in Greek cities, where these ingredients were prized for making indulgent treats. Food vendors and specialized cooks who could create elaborate desserts and other indulgent foods found profitable niches in the ancient Greek economy. The willingness of people to pay premium prices for pleasurable food experiences created economic opportunities that supported specialized food crafts and contributed to urban economic development. The seasonal rhythms of ancient Greek junk food consumption followed both agricultural cycles and religious calendars. Harvest times brought abundant ingredients for making preserves and other treats that could be enjoyed throughout the year. Religious festivals created predictable demand for specific types of celebration foods, allowing food producers and vendors to plan their activities around these events. These seasonal patterns also influenced the psychological impact of indulgent foods. Treats that were only available at certain times of year became more precious and anticipated, creating stronger emotional associations than foods that were available constantly. This scarcity-driven desire is a powerful psychological mechanism that enhanced the appeal of many ancient junk foods. The social stratification visible in ancient Greek junk food culture reflects broader patterns of inequality in Greek society. Wealthy elites could afford elaborate desserts made with expensive imported ingredients, while ordinary people had to content themselves with simpler treats made from local ingredients. These food differences served as markers of social status and reinforced class distinctions. However, the democratizing effect of street food and simpler versions of elite treats also provided opportunities for social mobility and cultural sharing. A successful merchant might be able to afford increasingly elaborate foods as his wealth grew, and food vendors could become prosperous by catering to demand for accessible indulgences. The technological innovations driven by ancient Greek junk food culture contributed to broader advances in food preparation and cooking techniques. The demand for perfectly fried foods led to improvements in oil heating and temperature control. The desire for consistent honey cake textures drove innovations in mixing and baking techniques. These technological advances had applications beyond junk food preparation and contributed to the overall sophistication of Greek cuisine. The preservation techniques developed for creating long-lasting treats also had broader applications for food security and trade. Methods for preserving fruits in honey or creating shelf-stable nut preparations could be adapted for preserving other foods, contributing to food system resilience and enabling long-distance trade in food products. The cultural transmission of junk food knowledge in ancient Greece happened through various channels, including family traditions, professional training, and social networks. Mothers taught daughters how to make traditional honey cakes and other family treats, ensuring that recipes and techniques passed from generation to generation. Professional cooks and food vendors developed their own trade secrets and training systems for creating consistently appealing products. Social networks also played crucial roles in spreading food knowledge and preferences. People who traveled between cities would bring knowledge of new treats and preparation methods with them, leading to cultural cross-fertilization and the evolution of food traditions. Wealthy households that employed skilled cooks became centers for culinary innovation that influenced broader food cultures. The moral dimensions of ancient Greek junk food consumption were complex and often contradictory. While indulgent eating was celebrated in certain contexts, like religious festivals and social gatherings, it was also criticized by philosophers and moralists who viewed excessive pleasure-seeking as incompatible with virtue and wisdom. These moral tensions created sophisticated cultural conversations about the proper role of pleasure in human life. The Greeks developed nuanced understandings of when indulgence was appropriate and when it became problematic, creating ethical frameworks for thinking about food that balanced pleasure with virtue and individual desire with social responsibility. The role of military campaigns in spreading Greek junk food culture was significant and often overlooked. As Greek armies traveled throughout the Mediterranean world, they carried their food preferences and preparation techniques with them. Soldiers developed portable versions of their favorite treats that could survive long marches and provide comfort during difficult campaigns. These military adaptations of civilian junk foods often involved concentrated ingredients and preservation techniques that made the treats even more calorie-dense and long-lasting. Honey-preserved fruits, nuts roasted in salt, and dried meat preparations became staples of military provisioning, introducing Greek food preferences to conquered territories and foreign allies. The psychological impact of familiar comfort foods on military morale was well understood by Greek commanders. Providing soldiers with occasional treats that reminded them of home helped maintain discipline and fighting spirit during long campaigns. This understanding of food's emotional power demonstrates the sophisticated psychological thinking that Greeks applied to food consumption. The influence of Persian and other foreign culinary traditions on Greek junk food culture became more pronounced as Greek contact with other civilizations increased through trade and conquest. Persian confections made with exotic spices and preparation techniques were adapted to Greek tastes and ingredients, creating hybrid treats that combined familiar flavors with novel textures and presentations. These cross-cultural food exchanges enriched Greek junk food culture and provided models for creating more elaborate and diverse indulgent treats. The willingness of Greeks to adapt foreign food ideas while maintaining their own cultural preferences demonstrates the dynamic and evolving nature of ancient food cultures. The educational aspects of junk food culture in ancient Greece deserve attention as well. Learning to prepare elaborate desserts and other indulgent foods was part of the domestic education that wealthy Greek women received. These skills were seen as markers of sophistication and cultural refinement that enhanced a woman's value in marriage negotiations and social relationships. The transmission of these culinary skills created networks of knowledge and expertise that helped preserve and develop Greek food traditions. Women who were particularly skilled at creating impressive treats gained social status and could sometimes even earn income by teaching their techniques to others or providing foods for special occasions. The connection between ancient Greek junk food culture and hospitality traditions was profound and lasting. Offering elaborate treats to guests was a fundamental expression of hospitality that demonstrated respect, wealth, and cultural sophistication. The quality and variety of foods served to visitors reflected directly on the host's status and character. This hospitality function of indulgent foods created pressure for continuous innovation and improvement in treat preparation. Hosts competed to offer their guests increasingly impressive food experiences, driving demand for new recipes, exotic ingredients, and skilled preparation techniques. This competitive aspect of hospitality contributed to the ongoing development and refinement of Greek junk food culture. The therapeutic and medicinal uses of certain indulgent foods in ancient Greek culture reveal another dimension of their significance. Some honey-based preparations were believed to have healing properties, while certain nut and fruit combinations were thought to provide energy and strength. These medicinal associations gave some junk foods additional cultural value beyond their purely pleasurable aspects. The integration of pleasure and medicine in Greek food thinking reflects their holistic approach to health and well-being. They understood that foods could affect both physical and emotional health, and they used indulgent treats strategically to address various forms of discomfort and distress. The influence of Greek junk food culture on the development of professional cooking and food service industries was substantial. The demand for consistently high-quality treats created opportunities for specialized food professionals who could master complex preparation techniques and manage the logistics of feeding large groups at festivals and celebrations. These professional food service providers developed systems for large-scale food preparation, ingredient sourcing, and quality control that influenced broader commercial practices. The skills and knowledge they developed contributed to the sophistication of urban food systems and helped establish models for commercial food production that influenced later civilizations. The symbolic meanings attached to different types of junk foods in ancient Greek culture were complex and culturally specific. Certain treats were associated with particular gods, life events, or social relationships, giving them significance beyond their immediate sensory appeal. Understanding these symbolic associations helps explain why certain foods remained popular across generations and became integral parts of cultural traditions. These symbolic dimensions of food also influenced how and when different treats were consumed. Foods associated with celebration might be considered inappropriate during periods of mourning, while treats connected to specific deities would be featured prominently during relevant religious festivals. This symbolic regulation of food consumption created structured patterns of indulgence that helped maintain social order while providing outlets for pleasure-seeking behavior. As we look back at ancient Greek junk food culture from our modern perspective, we can see remarkable continuities in human behavior around indulgent eating. The psychological drives that led ancient Greeks to seek out honey-sweetened treats and fried delicacies are the same drives that lead modern people to fast food restaurants and candy aisles. The social functions that junk food served in ancient Greek society, from celebration to comfort to social bonding, are identical to the functions it serves today. Understanding ancient Greek junk food culture helps us see that our modern struggles with food temptation and dietary balance are not new problems created by industrial society, but rather ancient human challenges that every culture has had to navigate in its own way. The Greeks developed their own strategies for managing these challenges, some successful and some not, but all recognizably human in their complexity and contradiction. The legacy of ancient Greek junk food culture extends far beyond the specific foods and preparation methods they developed. They established cultural patterns and psychological associations around indulgent eating that continue to influence Mediterranean food culture today. They created social institutions and economic structures around pleasure foods that provided models for later societies. Most importantly, they demonstrated that the tension between pleasure and health, indulgence and moderation, is a fundamental part of the human experience that requires ongoing attention and wisdom to navigate successfully. The ancient Greeks were not so different from us when it came to food temptation and indulgence. They created their own versions of junk food using the ingredients and techniques available to them, and they struggled with many of the same questions about pleasure, health, and moderation that we face today. Their experiences offer both cautionary tales about the dangers of excessive indulgence and inspiring examples of how to integrate pleasure foods into a balanced life. By understanding their approach to junk food, we can better understand our own relationships with indulgent eating and perhaps find wisdom for navigating the food choices we face in our modern world. The enduring appeal of the foods they created many of which survive in recognizable forms today, testifies to their deep understanding of what makes food truly satisfying and memorable. In honey-soaked pastries, oil-fried delicacies, and wine-sweetened treats, they captured something essential about the human relationship with pleasure and comfort that transcends time and culture. Their junk food legacy reminds us that the pursuit of culinary pleasure, when balanced with wisdom and moderation, is not a weakness to be overcome, but a fundamental part of what makes us human.